Yes.
Lama nangam bunjam beyong la shaza lo kange lo dwe dimnye dent nyedra nam da rab sarave jinye tungun shishin zik nije tu gara le bonze kunda si be tunzir ma re mentam dungara che zeve Rosoi kun la puje tarse yin lai chu ju yong den song Zhu tare che zhu nyamu ni lu le che chak zhu zhun zi chen Ma re mun sir dung ran yu gu chen ye chen zi ra de nam Dene ta jen sa ju tar se yen den lu zo ja se tu gu chun tra chu dan chu ni jen te da le me sen jan be yong la en du ce dene che je chen ro zre che da le de mo men ba ra sa ne Ca dan den je zhong lu dou ba ye lu zhe bo be nong wa zao tu sol Nam da zu zhen ser je sa ye den den zhe bo me ling ge ben zhe xie rab nie de nong we chu gen sar Tom chon zhuo ye la ma sha ge yu Javian Shana do Jin Rese, Sayin Bo Javan Brasere, Nam Ganin Bo Sham Gondozon, Nieve, Sessin Jelo Saje, Serab Gondo, Sije Tanile, Tam Gesam Shagion Zon Shen, Jean Juvin Belang King Karma Pa, Mishi Tebe Chu Zuge. Lasso Japsun Drove Semtang, Shon Chupje, Semrimbush Nampani Saldane, Josen Ronang.
Oh, so please begin by taking refuge in the three jewels and then generate the body-mind, after which you continue by listening attentively to the explanations that are to be given.
Ta chedangi chan chena, chedangi chan chena, sanje chomden degi, dusha yulki, chu song sak yultil döne, dene tekpa che shung yin se do. Chungta ye se do. Dene ota tendegi.
Tekpa che chu ni da Theravada da Mahayana.
Ya. O tende duja yul döne songari. Konsa ke.
Tene shi kan det song så. Ya je song la.
Ta yit mazen research. Chungta ye se do yen sam ten so te duja kwarang la döne songari.
Now, in terms of understanding Buddha Shakyamuni's doctrine, which in terms of various perspectives has a number of divisions, such as the two divisions of Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism, the four divisions of four schools of thought, where the perspective is to set forth on the basis of, to begin with, a philosophical viewpoint as to the nature of reality. On the basis of that viewpoint, or a number of them, explanations as to the true nature of reality, according to Buddhism, are set forth. There are those divisions and other divisions as to Buddha Shakyamuni's doctrine. Now, it's important to understand the following, namely that these divisions, or these various perspectives, as it were given by Buddha Shakyamuni in order to accommodate the fact that those to be trained, those who want to train on the path to enlightenment, will have different mindsets in terms of aspiration, in terms of viewpoint, in terms of a capacity for understanding what reality in fact is, and so on. So it's important to get one's head around this, namely that all those different branches, divisions, and so on are given in order to accommodate a number of mindsets in terms of those who are interested in the Buddhist path, so that everyone is able to practice the path according to his capacity for understanding what the path is about, and his capacity in terms of, or his aspirations in terms of what he thinks is important in terms of what can be accomplished on this path to enlightenment.
Tagana shinge perna kibu sumge mamje ramba segindo. Ka sinkinge tsikde nupa yonkinji la kor. Nupa chechung da tenne lam ramba sum singeje sanje sum yor.
So there is yet another division known as the stages of, in the context of 3 types of individual. And when the word individual is used here, it's a reference to anyone interested in practicing the path to enlightenment. And the word individual here has the connotation of capacity. So what one can understand from the short phrase, 3 types of individual, is that Buddha Shakyamuni spoke of 3 types of mindset, each with its capacity or level of capacity, which he, in his skillfulness and wisdom, knew is necessary in order to make it possible for all to practice the path to enlightenment on the basis of their individual capacity.
Penna te ped shubina maranso jigdin dina konsak onpol ramba mendavandu.
It's the same in the world at large. Whatever, in terms of profession, studies, whatever, it is a fact that individuals have different mindsets and different capacities in terms of what they are able to achieve. Because what would the point be in trying to achieve something one can't achieve? That would be rather counterproductive. One wouldn't achieve anything. So it's important to understand that this applies in each and everything that one does, namely the fact that each person has a specific capacity for one or many specific things, but not for all.
Teacher yonde pen jibu chung sanghe dege durjat khande chire de yorsna. Oh. Nga miglu tata ngarang yue de wande pe yakundu twenjin sangmandu den nangshin maung ba ngai jenan riksa re samsung ge della de ne dene jibu chung lang ram sanghe de song de.
So in terms of the stages of the three paths, with respect to the three types of individual, referred to shortly or described shortly. Yeah, you have the first of the three, the so-called path for individuals of a lesser capacity, or the lesser path, one could say, perhaps. What sort of mindset are we talking about here? Well, it's the kind of individual who takes the following view, namely that the life of a human being is a good life. This individual is comfortable with the possible rebirth as a human being yet again. In fact, this type of person would like to be reborn in the world of human beings in his next life and future lives. This type of person's mindset is such that this individual finds comfort in the circumstances of a human rebirth. And there are many people who have this mindset.
Tangala sayala kange mendo, desala kange mendo, nasa chona yang insured yore, temena yang ropachi, tande chewado, ngan dimu chene mutu and rotum and tixare, something tindeg consatela tene, sanje galandum chixon.
So, if we take the example of the European continent, in most, or in the majority of European countries, the majority of the population has access to free health care, free education, access to food, doesn't pose problems. If one loses one's job, one can be covered by the Social Security Department of one's country until one, or a labor union, until one finds a new job and can pay one's rent, food and other expenses. So for the majority of the populations of those countries, life is quite comfortable, and there are many in those countries who are satisfied with this. And could, as a Buddhist, and rather do as a Buddhist, feel that their goal in terms of practicing the path would be that of obtaining yet another human rebirth.
Jandende mutune miglu negechetu migewa chupong songje.
And for the sake of those of this mindset or this aspiration, as it were, Buddha Shakyamuni set forth the path which is primarily concerned with the practices of the 10 virtues. Because when that path is practiced properly, rebirth as a human being is secured, or can be secured by way of that path.
Tam milu nane milu chipochli yach. Milu pe kanjin chasang yonkinjir che gogundo na getu cheperchin do songje.
Now, if the aspiration is to obtain rebirth as a human being again with specific circumstances of comfort, because we all know that all human beings are not born into circumstances of comfort, as it were. Some face quite a bit of hardship, and some face extreme hardship. However, for those whose aspiration is to obtain a human rebirth with circumstances of comfort, then in the context of the lesser path, there is the, again, practices of the 10 virtues, but actively, meaning one doesn't just give up engaging in any of the 10 non-virtues and see that as one's path of virtue, which is the case with the previous mindset. Here, there is the additional aspiration for specific circumstances of comfort, and in order to achieve that, there needs to be, the individual needs to actively engage in the 10 virtues actions, enacting, rather I should say. It's about the practitioner enacting the 10 virtues and not just giving up the 10 non-virtues without enacting their opposites.
Tato tendechre di detail lam jebu chungu lam jerambala shirai sheju.
So this is simply a generalization of the so-called lesser path. There are many, many more perspectives. However, we do not, unfortunately, have time to go into all the specifics.
Tene ta jebun dringil lam jeramba singente terawa dange lam jeramba de zore de.
Then we have the middling path, or the path for those of a middling capacity, as it were, as to the mindset. And this is the path known as Theravada Buddhism.
Tati mete the condition some georasana. Penatanga milu lemba some jigatan and regimento. Mega losing a country chibuchi yang. Ngala nasa yungendo. Semaji wa yungendo. Lula nasa yungendo. Tagana shinke nga gingo charugudo 대간나 신게 알이 시승게도 용사래 되네야 난 대반도 전에 샘투 보면도 간대지 이외나야 되네 면도 방법 안에 용되게도 단데 강갑은 거도 없어.
So what's the general mindset here of someone interested in this path? Well, it's about the individual who would not be comfortable with just a rebirth as a human being, whether it's about a human being in general, where circumstances vary, or the specific rebirth of the additional good circumstances of comfort. The Theravada Buddhist practitioner's mindset, as it were, is one which feels this is far from satisfying. Because this individual, in terms of the capacity of his mindset, is such that he sees that no matter how pleasant my circumstances are, suffering is unavoidable. There will be adverse circumstances, such as physical ill health, mental ill health. There will be the discomfort of aging, of growing old and weak, and there will be the more dramatic discomfort, as it were, of having to face death. The person or individual of this mindset sees that there, in spite of the general good circumstances of comfort, there are unavoidable circumstances of discomfort, the unwanted event of disease, of aging, and so on and so forth. Therefore, the person of this mindset, his aspiration is to go beyond the world, to attain liberation from yet another rebirth in a worldly existence.
다 틴데기 진텔라 데니 인터기 택반도 송배 람지는 바데 데네 가동보 신내 감죽 데네 플락통 공사가 다음에 베트는데 감죽 데네 랑람데 렘바신도 제 수송네 탄제수
니데 가레 랑랑 기림바
rang lam jiran bat döne
rang sula kogorago
den ninte ba korang lam jiran bat döne den döne lam jiran bat döne tar jebote racham singket togu ti dege dungal yenje dungal te samje samna matong wa yenje dungal samna bet matong wa chan mare yin yang dagin yewe samna te mer.
So this type of individual, in terms of the various stages of his path, the path in Theravada Buddhism, sets out to engage in the various practices of this path in order to attain the goal of this path. So practices include shamatha meditation as well as vipassana meditation. And in terms of vipassana meditation, the more advanced Vipassana focus is that of no self. That is to say, the essencelessness of the individual in terms of the individual's true nature. So there are many different practices, many different stages of the path and so on, which the practitioner here engages in, and by practicing his own path, the path for which he has the capacity that makes his efforts successful, he is able to make progress because this suits his mindset simply, these practices and teachings. Therefore, he does make progress and attains the goal called arhathood, the state of an arhat. And an arhat is an individual who has realized the essencelessness of the individual, no self in the context of the individual. Now, in terms of practices such as exchanging one's own happiness for the suffering of others, as set forth in the 37 practices authored by Thomas Khenpo. The mindset here, in terms of Theravada Buddhism, isn't concerned with the welfare of others to that extent. However, it does not at all mean that loving kindness and compassion are not practices of Theravada Buddhism. Both loving kindness and compassion are practiced and developed by practitioners on this path in Theravada Buddhism. It's just that compassion, loving kindness and compassion as taught in Theravada Buddhism do not go as far as in Mahayana Buddhism. That's the difference. It's not cultivated to the extent that it's cultivated in Mahayana Buddhism, and the focus isn't to exchange one's own good circumstances for the suffering of others, taking upon oneself the suffering of others. And this sort of mindset is the most common among human beings. The majority of human beings do not, by nature, have the mindset where it's natural for them to give all happiness, good circumstances, and the like to others in exchange for the suffering of others. It's beyond the majority of human beings to do so. So this is the most common mindset in terms of the human race, as it were.
Perna. Tsongkong ni de se shim de yuan na.
Tsongkong?
Yeah.
That's it.
Tene tsongkong yin da de me shor jo na. Ti chi le yang king ge tsongkong de ge tsongpon de ge korang gi chala de tong bu song job che ge ro.
Right.
Ma to yin da de zan ro ma re. Ta konsa ri ji ge yin ge tsongkong de ge na me shor ye de ma se to son nge ka le yin je go ma.
There is an example which would make it very easy for everybody to understand this and relate to the naked truth about oneself, as it were, that usually one is more concerned with one's own situation than the situation of others, even though one has concern for other people who suffer, but not to the extent where you would let them move into your house and you move out on the street, for example. Khenpo Rinpoche gives the example of 2 shops, one next to the other. Both shop owners know each other.
Good friend.
They are good friends. Now one day, one of the shops, there a fire start. How does most neighboring shop owners react? Well, by trying to save their merchandise, the merchandise they have in their shop, from being destroyed, it would be very unusual to find a neighboring shop owner abandoning the effort to protect his shop and instead run into the neighboring shop and help that shop owner to save his merchandise. That would be quite unusual. But there are people like that. Some people have this greater capacity for good. There are a few rare examples of people who would do just that, namely, first help the neighboring shop owner whose shop is on fire to save his merchandise before concerning himself with his own merchandise. However, this is sort of what one sometimes refers to in the West as instinctive behavior, and it's regarded quite a natural reaction to protect your property before the property of others. However, if one thinks about it, if you rush out of your shop and try to help the shop owner of the neighboring shop to put the fire out, it means that you are protecting your own property. Because if the fire is put out in his shop, it won't spread to yours. But yeah, the human mind is a bit odd once in a while. It doesn't even see an advantage in helping others. Or they rather do not always see that there would be an advantage in helping others. This type of individual, the third type, the one who reacts with wanting to help out the owner of the neighboring shop before concerning himself with his own shop and the safety of his property, or protecting his property. This is the Mahayana type of mindset individual. And for this type of individual, Mahayana Buddhism is more suited. And so you have to keep in mind that what's taught in this text, what a Bodhisattva does, his 37 practices, is for the third type of mindset, that kind of individual. However, it's not the case that all of this mindset from the very beginning have a fully developed Mahayana type of mindset. However, there are those who have the potential for generating the Mahayana type of mindset. Therefore, there is so-called mind training in its hundreds and hundreds of perspectives and methods. All methods with the aim to enable those who could develop in this manner to do so. So from the very beginning, it may not at all be possible for a person who has the potential for a Mahayana type of mindset to, at the very outset of the path, exchange his own happiness for the suffering of others. However, as Khenpo Rinpoche said, there are hundreds and hundreds of methods by way of which so-called mind training has the effect of shifting or developing this mindset so that the individual further on his path, having made progress, is able to do so, namely to exchange his own happiness for the suffering of others.
Bodhisattva Chaya avatar singete reyore jase shiva lesson.
Avatar, yeah.
Yeah. They get penang around mirab, get cancer somewhere, Patrum Butcher Chayana, to have job yepen on Sundua, job yetugunat. Konda Vichel Chayana, Junjuka Sholoka Redeland Dawamong Samatang in Sungdoa.
Now, there is a text, a very ancient text, authored by an Indian Buddhist master of old, Shantideva, the Bodhicharya Avatara, which primarily means engaging in the deeds of a Bodhisattva. And this is a text which sets forth so many it sets forth numerous key instructions in terms of so-called mind training. Mind training being a name for the type of development just explained, and which is explained throughout this text, what a Bodhisattva does. Now, another and much later, in fact quite recent, Tibetan Buddhist master who lived in the 1800s and 1900s, Paltrul Rinpoche, he made this text, the Bodhicharya Avatara, authored by Shantideva, his main focus in terms of his personal practice and development on the path to enlightenment in the context of Mahayana Buddhism. He made it his key practice and is reported to have said that he spent months and months of contemplative meditation as to the meaning of each of the verses set forth by Shantideva in his Bodhicharya Avatara. So one can then learn from this that, or from his example, that it's not a matter of just reading a text and then end up with the idea that one knows it because one has the sentiment that one understood what the words said. It's really a matter of contemplative meditation over time as to each and every verse of the text in order to be able to make the kind of progress that is the goal of those verses and the reason for Shantideva setting forth these verses. Now, what a Bodhisattva does in 37 practices, as set forth by Thomas Khenpo, sums up, as it were, what Shantideva said in his Bodhicharya Avatara. Thus, the 37 practices are exceedingly profound.
Penna Junju li chatsum bayina tangarang lama kadin jeni tanda Khenpo aperbuche korang la mete tangan ju meto de shongwa den jamya jensen shungpi jiyor laman jam yalsk
Jam yang yalsen
sen chasan chen jam
kong yang sakyara
sakyaware
also
kong junjuk something leute losum gam nang bres songdo 텐도 정집 쌤다 감사치 내 송도스 레우 찍을 로섬 감나
찬슈키 쌤기 로컴성 됐지
텐도 제 감송은 송도스
Khenpo Rinpoche gives the following example in terms of how to go about the text known as the Bodhicharya Avatara, authored by Shantideva, engaging in the deeds of a Bodhisattva. There was a very well-known Sakya master. He passed away sort of 10 years ago or something like that. And one of his spiritual guides by the name Jamyang Gyaltsen. Che Jamyang Gyaltsen yang jede yorve. Now Abba Rinpoche, or Khenpo Abba, as he was also known, was one of Khenpo Rinpoche's main teachers, and one of Abba Rinpoche's or Khenpo Abba's main spiritual guides was Jamyang Gyaltsen, who once explained in a conversation that he spent 3 years practicing or applying contemplative meditation and other types of meditation he spent 3 years on the instructions in just one of the chapters of the Bodhicharya Avatara, the chapter which sets forth different states or different types of meditation or different meditative states, deep and profound meditative states, so he spent the period of 3 years doing just that, and is reported to then have said that after that period I felt that I had achieved a bit of the habit of the body mind. And that concerns primarily the relative perspective of the body mind. That's what Jamyang Jansen was referring to. So during this period, his primary focus was the body mind in its relative perspective. Now, Jamyang Jansen stayed in the solitude of the mountains in a simple dwelling there throughout this period and throughout many other periods as well. And it's reported because as most more advanced practitioners, he had numerous disciples who would, some of them, live in this place of solitude as well, and some would come from time to time, and he would guide and teach them. And it's reported that during teaching sessions, which would be in the open as it were, because all there was the very simple dwellings of the practitioners. There were no other buildings. During teaching sessions, it is reported, wild animals would roam around this audience of people with Jamyang Jansen, their spiritual guide, teaching the members of the audience freely without exhibiting any fear of the humans who had gathered there. And it said that this was, or this is, an indication of that the spiritual guide, in this case Jamyang Jansen, had actually, or had actualized the body-mind in its relative perspective. For example, it's reported, now Lama Jamyang Jansen had full monastic ordination, and therefore he would just eat one meal a day. And in the wilderness of Tibet, that meant barley flour mixed with water or tea and butter once a day, and he would, it is reported, make a substantial amount for his noon meal. And during his noon meal, birds in the surroundings would descend, and he would share his meal with them. And at times there were so many birds, the meal went to them, and Lama Jamyang Jansen didn't get much, if anything at all.
And the
Lama was reported to simply smile and jokingly say, well, the birds took my noon meal today.
And
it appears that when this level of the body-mind has been achieved, wild animals, non-human beings, and others, they quite naturally seek the presence of this person. Now, the reason for Khenpo Rinpoche telling you the example of Lama Jamyang Jansen is that the teachings in the 37 practices on the body-mind in its relative perspective were completed in the previous teaching session, and today we'll continue with practice number 22, and with it the body-mind in its absolute perspective is explained by the author.
Dondam semche la lop chur tembatela ngö thang jetap chung chu ni yong.
And here, in terms of teachings on the body-mind in its absolute perspective, you have, in terms of a practitioner on the path, two stages. That of actual meditation and that of post-meditation, these two phases. As to the body-mind in its absolute perspective.
Oh,
yes. Sorry. Yes.
Chödrak nongwa deta rang sem song. Ta de song yo de la ngal khanda khan nang du ga song se. Pa na wang bo thu gi yula.
Wang bo thu gi yula. So, to begin with, the text reads as follows. Apparent phenomena, all of them, are fabrications of the mind. And this, Khenpo Rinpoche explains, is a reference to the objects of the five sense perceptions, as well as the objects of the intellect.
Penna, migi yurtu zuk.
Kangi yurtu? Mig.
Yurtu zuk. Nawe yurtu da. La sopandona wangborana tandrevege yurt tumumai barrel migungdoa.
So the five sense perceptions are in contact with their objects via a physical sense faculty. So you have the eye faculty, the ear faculty, and so on, by way of which visual objects, sounds, etc. Are perceived. These objects appear and are registered by, and their presence is registered by way of the physical sense faculties. So that's a reference to apparent phenomena, all of them.
Rangi sem song, rangi sem song, Tandela Bezaza Machena, no one does a sempre said out to the corner, Mandigat.
Nangwa and so Nangwa semre sena mare.
Mare, on a carresena, send Pashala than the Shiro to Shari.
Semgi bakcha latene.
Shiro to no magic shar.
Shiro to nang daddy take chingi lugla. So, and then there is the next sentence, are fabrications of the mind. Now, you need to understand what that means, are fabrications of the mind, so that the mistaken idea that all things one sees, hears, and so on are the mind doesn't happen. Because Daddy Samsangi Tavare Seguri Mari. Because according to Mahayana Buddhism, or Mahayana Buddhism's general viewpoint, whether one talks about the so-called mind-only school of thought or other schools of thought within Mahayana Buddhism, the general viewpoint is the following, namely that the mind stream, because the so-called mind is a series of vivid and knowing instances, and these vivid and knowing instances carry so-called predispositions. Predispositions which are about the fact that a given individual is predisposed to act in one way or another as a result of previous ways of acting, by way of which he has achieved, as it were, or because of which rather the individual is predisposed to again act in that manner. So apparent phenomena, all of them, originate with, as it were, these predispositions carried by the vivid and knowing instances of the mind stream. And in terms of the sentient being, there is then the habit of viewing the apparent phenomena, all of them, as outer, as different from the predispositions with which they originate. So Khenpo Rinpoche pointed to the importance of being careful here in terms of understanding what are fabrications of the mind, what that phrase means. And not just read the words, one can understand the words and then make one's own conclusions without finding out what the Buddha said that this means, by way of studies, contemplative meditation, and so on. Da bakcha chiksena. Da cheparwa chik.
Cheparwa ta karina. Ti bhasha telatene jin chike bhasha de yandus se yonde shirul tu. Ta tsenma chi sharum biorwa. Zukchik.
Tetsuba. Da migina.
Ja, migina.
Det kända jag.
Nawala yina dai tsenma chi.
Migi. Da navasena. Drasena.
Da ti tsenma ti sharum della minchi ta yagdo.
Alltså?
Min te ta sa vi jetala. Nge nam to te ge. Min te da tsenma ti nitte. Chigre.
Min te tan tsenma de da dra typa de tsenma re då, dra koran.
Ja.
Ja. Dela min chikta. Tini?
Tini chik tu te tokpak.
Lasso?
Tene trundong do.
So, the phrase "are fabrications of the mind" should be, in general, understood as follows. As was explained, there are predispositions in the shape and form of so-called habitual patterns carried by the vivid and knowing instances, the vivid and knowing instances that mainstream, which one in general refers to as the mind. Now, because, or in terms of these habitual patterns manifesting, there are, or in terms of that, there is the following process. You have the habitual pattern or patterns. Let's say there is a pattern, a specific one, in the context of sound and it manifesting. To begin with, there is the coming together or the congruous meeting of specific causes and conditions that affect the habitual pattern in question, so that it manifests in the outer world as, in this case, a sound. The following then happens in the mind. So via that physical sense faculty of the ear, the presence of sound is registered. immediately the sixth working of the worldly mindset, which works via or functions via the so-called mind faculty, i.e. not a physical sense faculty, but one of a mental nature, reacts when the sound is heard via the physical sense faculty. Then the intellect reacts and focuses upon this apparent phenomenon, a sound. And that's where conceptual perception kicks in. A name is given to the sound, namely the name sound, and then there is a reaction, pleasant, unpleasant, and so on. And the result of this entire process is the deception of an outer object which exists in separation of the mind which knows it. And in terms of naming the object at hand, once conceptual perception has done that, the name and the object are by the intellect seen as the one and same thing. There is no knowledge at all of the fact that the name and its object are two different things. The two are identified as one, and the thing in question, the object of the intellect at this point, here the intellect draws the conclusion that the object at hand has a real reality. It's real, it exists out there, and I, as a person, I'm here, the sound is over there, and it's two completely different things. So the worldly intellect fails to see that it is the habitual patterns carried by the vivid and knowing instances that make up the mind stream that are the origin of so-called outer objects or objects out there. Because of the way the conceptual segment of conceptual perception, or rather because of the way conceptual perception interprets the input via the sense faculty and then via the mind faculty and so on.
Jänner
So in fact, every moment of the day and the night, the worldly mindset is trapped in this type of delusion. Whether one wants to call it self-deception, illusion, delusion, confusion, doesn't make much of a difference. It's really, if I may say so, a screwed up understanding of what happened, because the conclusion the worldly intellect makes is completely mistaken.
But de pechi shubina ta dogon sin ngai mani de melam to tenengala tene khongba ta longba chela so mi chona tik ngone ngani sa tala yo marwa
For example, at night when one dreams, one may dream of spending time in a pleasant dwelling. One may dream of encountering a tiger in the wild, and so on and so forth. Now, while dreaming, all of what is dreamt of during the dream is experienced as real, having a real reality. Here we have the screwed up intellect again. The presumption is that it's real. However, at no point were there in your bedroom a pleasant dwelling nor a fear-inspiring tiger. Those objects were never there. Even so, while you dream of them, that's your perception of them. They are there and they are real. And human beings, when dreaming, dream of things that manifest in the world of humans. So it's the things that human beings dream of, things they are used to, simply. So why do human beings not dream of things in other worldly existences? Well, remember, predisposition. You're, as a human being, predisposed to the habits of human beings. And that's why you dream of things in the human world. It's quite simple. Da semsu drupa sedurva. So in terms of the mind-only doctrine, what it says is that the way we see things, the way we experience things, the way we conceptualize things are originating with the habits carried by the vivid and knowing instances that make up the so-called mind stream. It's not that mind has manufactured this world or something like that, a frequent misunderstanding. It simply points to that as a human being, you're predisposed to see everything in the light of the habits of the human mind.
Thoma ngotre nang du nyamling pa ji na. No semsu ngotre pa songat.
There is a great master of the Kaji school, one of its forefathers, Gambopa, who said, in terms of a practitioner, the first thing one needs to make clear to the aspiring practitioner is that apparent phenomena, all of them, are fabrications of the mind.
Nungwa kanga
the sem the factory impa tene pa the chala so shava songji kogo marvasi.
Gogo mar. Dita no Samsung no the tresona sem koran karim but dancing ibeg na no to nang.
Now, as was just said, this doesn't mean that the so-called mind is some sort of factory which manufactures all the things one sees, hears, and so on, all objects a human being experiences. It's about the process by way of which the screwed up intellect makes the mistakes that were just mentioned. A total misunderstanding of the nature of things in terms of what their origin are and so on. So, secondly, Gampopa continued to explain. He said, once this is clear to the practitioner, the relationship between the things the mind knows and their origin, once that is clear, then or once there is a clear and comprehensive knowledge of that fact, counteracting worldly deception or the worldly deceptive mindset being counteracted, and it's quite clear to the practitioner that things are not what he used to think they are, namely real and so on. Once that is understood or comprehended to some extent by the practitioner, that will facilitate making or going on to the next stage, that of efforts designed to bring about a realization of mind's true nature, the mind itself.
Di indu penna sotu le noa kare sharna yang bhasha chitop sharwa ma to shirur tu mebe ngepa ting supa che malab na da shakshin zokshin kang ina yang lam thompo tunzo gami sena yang kechare gam hoye te pe misiwa kakures.
So it's a matter of, to begin with, realizing that whatever is known by way of the 5 sense perceptions and by way of the intellect, all objects of these 6 functions of the worldly mindset are the outcome of habitual patterns in the mind. Once that is known, unless there is a definitive knowledge of this. Unless there is a definitive knowledge of this, the fact that outer things are real and exist in separation of the mind which knows them, are completely different from the mind which knows them, unless this mistaken mindset isn't corrected to the point where it is clear to the practitioner that this isn't the case. There is no way at all in which a person, even though the person may claim that he meditates on Mahamudra and Mahati, that he's doing that. Because lacking this knowledge, that definitive knowledge, makes it impossible for him to practice Mahamudra or Mahati. It's beyond the individual who, to begin with, does not have this definitive knowledge of the fact that apparent phenomena, all of them, are fabrications of the mind, and the way in which they are fabrications of the mind, and so on and so forth. All the details need to be known to at all be able to do the practices known as Mahamudra and Mahati.
Jamgalodu Tayake Dorjing Gurjik Nan Songwa Sampe Nyeshe de Mandrona
Sampe
Nyeshe
Madrona
Na Gambe Dejing
Drona Gompe
Denching
Den Tene
Chin Top Mayins
Chin Chen
Chen
Khenpo.
Yeah. Top Mari Song Takyo Nang Shadwa.
Jamgon Kongtrul the First, Lord Rataya, said the following: in the absence of definitive knowledge of this, what was just explained in brief, achieved by way of contemplative meditation, meditation on the great truth, i.e. the true nature of reality, is not possible.
Te lamking gimbete Jedan Be Kabadabotan, Tinte Min Chemboche, some Mase, Sanje Loni Dong Hen Longting Shabimere. Lodutay Sanje Longting Shabimere.
And if one asks oneself, who was Jamgon Lodrataya? Well, his coming was foretold by Buddha Shakyamuni himself more than 2,000 years ago. So the Buddha himself at that time foretold that in the future there will be this great individual with the highest qualities and so on, foretelling the coming of Jamgon Lodrataya. So Jamgon Lodrataya wasn't just any old Buddhist master, as it were, if I may express myself like that. There are masters who are at various levels. Some have achieved great qualities in learning, some have achieved great qualities in both learning and meditation, or just one and the other, whatnot. Now, that doesn't, what was just said is not meant to diminish their achievements. Point made is they were not as great as Jamgon Lodrataya, whom one can with certainty say was an outstanding Buddhist master, in that Buddha Shakyamuni made a point of foretelling that this type of master will appear, manifest in the distant future, making sure that one can trust the fact that Jamgon Lodrataya is one of the great Buddhist masters of all times, along with others of his rank. So, without the kind of definitive knowledge referred to earlier, by quoting Jänner Lodro Taye, achieved by way of contemplative meditation. Without that, there are many Buddhist practitioners who devote years and years, if not their entire lifetime, to meditation on practices that in fact are beyond them, and therefore mistakes happen. They slip, Khenpo Rinpoche said. That's how he phrased it. That's why people who may even appear to perhaps have achieved very high levels slip. They simply appear to have done so. They haven't. Why? Because they lack the kind of definitive knowledge referred to by Jänner Lodro Taye, which he explains is achieved and is a prerequisite and is achieved by way of contemplative meditation. So the phrase are fabrications of the mind is a core phrase. In fact, it's a key instruction.
Peshe jagumendo tende jaju chongsona tedu nge shuyung machine tene ndaba yosege choso tendela te lama tsedin peshona tisu kundan kandishuna yandegirwa.
Now one of you who asked questions or whose question was answered during the previous session devoted to questions and answers. One of you has sent yet another question. Khenpo Rinpoche says at this point, well, it's not just one question, it's a number of them concerning a certain topic, that of a topic originating with the question about arhathood during the previous question and answer session. Unfortunately, we can't go into those details right now. We need to go on a bit with the text itself. However, in the future, there will be one or more sessions with questions and answers. And then what was asked will be answered. However, in various Buddhist centers, there are programs, perhaps not right now because of the pandemic, but there will be again in the future. Qualified masters will be invited, and during a visit like that, Khenpo Rinpoche says, you could also ask those questions and other ones in order to obtain more detailed information.
Okay. Naso sunam de tamje segbani tamne yebe dranam pamshet chega nache bala bayi sigbe tsole or show. Per nang wa sang ma